Not quite as good.
That wasn't your fault, but I just printed that up for the movie. That was the Let's see what we're seeing at the moment.
Your packet process here at 9:30. So I'm sitting down here at the Grand Poobah. Me and my friends. You know each other?
I know that face.
Yeah, how do I know you?
So many people and everything.
And then you bump into him somewhere.
Yeah.
So we're really random.
I should get you to get that process. Me and my friends. I did have someone sitting here, but they dropped out this morning. I said I did have a friend.
Thank you.
We're okay.
Okay. Get you up by 9:30, don't worry. 10:30 I mean. 9:30 will be a bit hard.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Running a bit of a quiz.
There's drinks here. Which one do I usually go for?
No, we said it's nice. You spent all your time on the plane and that.
The HRE Awards tomorrow night.
Yes.
Yeah, we've been nominated for 2.
Oh, really?
Shortlisted. It's exciting. The TM talent management team and then the graduate recruitment program.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
To the black tie.
I don't know actually.
Well, I'm already running a film for a while, so I don't know what else to do.
Go home tonight, go through the wardrobe. It's a good excuse to buy a new dress though, isn't it?
I ended up at having to.
I can't remember who I worked with in the many years ago, because I don't know
I went to the Law Awards on Friday night, and again, it's like getting it right. It was on a Friday night, so you don't want to go too over the top because people just come straight from work. Relaxed life. Decisions.
Oh, it's a tough life.
Yeah. Call my mum. She's just like, what are you doing again?
Yes, I'm going out again.
They're going out again, yeah.
local guy.
It's hilarious. You go home and they think they're like, you're really pale. It's like, I don't sit on the beach all day. I do have to go to work during the week.
I got told that. I went back to say, okay, you're very pale. I said, because I'm inside. So we just went to Bali and I went out there at Hampstead.
Oh, are you still in the Brit mode of as soon as it's sunny, you're kind of out there, even though you...
If I've got nothing to do at weekends,
The French are.
I'm
Yeah.
just going to chill.
Now they're actually
We're members of the Serengeti.
Yeah, so that's why I'm pretty sure
And we're under the one little umbrella just like.
And I went to beach parties and posed them.
I would just want to
It was good, it was fun.
Yeah. Well, I might keep going. I think we're just waiting for 3 people, but I'll start anyway. Sure.
I noticed Laura Roscoe from Barclays.
They got water there. Do you want juice? Sorry?
Laura Roscoe, I saw her name.
Yes.
Fast market email.
Just
I
5 million
network
people.
quite a lot.
And we invited 3 people you know.
I know.
One teacher? No. No? Well, your kids go to Australian school? Yeah. My wife just started there yesterday at Australian school.
as a teacher.
No, as a teacher's aide. So she's been going a bit insane in Singapore not working.
Well, why would you get that role right?
So we're so excited.
It's hard for working here. I didn't work for a couple of months when I first moved over. It's really tough.
Yeah, because our children are older. My son's 15, and the other one's 12. So
Other products and stuff.
which is fun. We're very excited. But I might start the morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm just conscious of time, and we're waiting on 3 more people, but we'll start anyway. Grace has informed us she'll get here about 9:30. We thought by doing an early one we might have done those urgent meetings, but she didn't miss that. Her CEO's called her in, so she'll be here. But my name's Andrew Tomich. I'm the EGM for Singapore, so thank you for coming along this morning. So today is really a roundtable think tank, so it's about interaction. And before I introduce you to Tracy Noon, I'd like to just outline the program and how it will go through, because our aim is to get you out of here by 10:30 on the dot. Breakfast will be served in the next few minutes, and we'll continue the conversation throughout breakfast as well. So in other words, it's a working breakfast, if that makes sense. But it's really interactive. So the purpose is really to canvass everyone's views and thoughts on some of the challenges that we're seeing within the Singapore market, and I'll outline some of those that we'll focus on this morning. And we'll also really focus on how we can all share this information. So it's very interactive. What we'll also be doing is we'll be recording it as well. And the purpose for that, so we can actually, we won't be recording names and locations, companies, but it's more about to help us with our research moving forward. So especially for Singapore, and we'll actually use it within the Hudson research. So I've got Thu at the back who is helping us. So that stops me from taking any notes, which makes my life a lot easier. Look, I'd like to now formally introduce you to Tracy Noon. Tracy Noon is our global chief people officer for Hudson. Good morning.
Good morning, sorry, I've late.
That's right. We expect you 9:30.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
How's that for you?
Thank you.
So you went too late after all.
Pardon?
You went too late after all.
The traffic was kind.
And look, Tracy Noon, so he has overall responsibility for the global strategy for how we develop, process and bring our people through on our talent programs. She works across a number of locations. So even though you're based in Sydney, you spend a lot of time
everywhere.
I keep thinking that your head office is New York.
It is.
All right, there you go. But lives and breathes in Sydney. Thank you so much. Tracy also has over 10 years working for Hudson. So has a really good understanding of this industry and also some of the issues that's facing talent management within local markets as well. But this morning we're going to focus on some key areas. So as per the invitation, we're going to focus on what are the key retention strategies in Singapore's candidate short market, the importance of developing local talent, the difference between high potential and high performance and why it matters, and how to identify high potential talent as well. So they're going to be the 4 key topics that we'll focus a lot of the conversation around. Most of you have been in Singapore for a while now, but as we know, Singapore labour market, it remains tight. And according to the latest Hudson report, hiring intentions, and we just completed this survey only last week, hiring intentions remain high in Singapore. Going into next quarter, 48.7% of the employers we surveyed have intentions to increase their workforce in Q3. And when you compare that to countries such as Australia, where their number is sitting at 24%, just shows you how hard and the key talent, to attract key talent in Singapore is going to be going forward. Add to this our low unemployment, the government's focus on developing our resident workforce, and also tightening immigration policies. We're set to see a continued shortage of talent within Singapore, which means it's more important for organisations to really work on to develop and hold on to their best people within their organisation. We also know, I'm not sure if you've had opportunity to read the white paper, but the recent government white paper highlighted the need for organisations to really focus on developing talent, especially from the local market, in order to able to shift their reliance on foreign workers within the senior roles within Singapore. And many organisations we know in Singapore are taking a strategic approach to talent management and really how do they identify and utilise high potential programs within the organisation, so develop and retain those people. And in fact, over 3/4 of organisations that we surveyed in Singapore in the last Hudson report are utilising these programs, which is good to see. Singapore employers recognise the importance of harnessing employers and the potential to retain talent and to really help drive business outcomes. Our tight talent market means our employers are primarily using the high performance potential program to boost engagement, which is great, and to retain staff. but both elements are key to driving efficiency and productivity and minimising business disruptions. And later in the session, we'll touch on that as well. Tracy will actually bring some insight into that. So before we start the conversation, I just really want to focus on some of the current issues that we see as a result of the white paper that we see as well. So we know that Singapore has a shrinking and ageing citizen population. There's falling birth rate, and the one that really got me is that by 2012, there'll be more, 2020 I mean, there'll be more Singaporeans retiring than entering the workforce, which is only 7 years away. So it's not far away before that we start to see this really escalate. So part of the conversation before I hand it over, please start, don't keep eating, please start, because the purpose is so we can actually work through. It's really one that, the key question I want to ask is, what is the biggest challenge from a people point of view are you seeing evolving within Singapore? And I really want to open that up to the table. Have some coffee. Yeah. So when we, so some of the stats, so as I said, the main one for me was really by 2020, there's more people retiring, and out of the Singapore market than entering. So it's only 7 years away. So when you think about if you've got a 15-year-old, they'll probably graduate in 7 years' time. He'll be 22. At that point in time, there'll be less people his age entering the workforce.
Well, Peter and Steve and I were talking about this around 10 minutes ago about, I think when market conditions are difficult and during the economic cycle and things are down, organisations are normally put a break on worrying about things like developing talent, L&D programs, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, it is something I think that RBS in particular takes pretty seriously and does well. And Steve made the point that when organisations aren't doing that, it's actually good for business for us, and that's true.
Yeah.
Because the typical job brief, technical skills, sure, are going to vary from job to job, but in terms of the person's soft skills, it's always about finding the high performer, it's always about finding the person who is in that top 5%. And essentially all we're doing is moving that person who may have developed that skill set from one organisation to another, and the new organisation benefits from us doing that. Whereas if they were able to, have a program internally to make that person feel like they have a future within the organisation and they have that opportunity to continue to develop their skills, they're not going to leave. Mm-hmm. What do you find works well, Steve, within RBS in terms of developing the talent?
We have we've developed our learning and development into sort of three main areas. So we have a talent pipeline piece, which was initially focused actually on the fact that we spend a lot of money on our graduates for 2 years and then we stop, and then 2 years hence they've all gone. So we actually we looked at how do we take graduates through to VP on a sort of 7-year, and only the best obviously will get through that. And then the pipeline gets a little, from VP upwards, gets a little bit more bespoke as to how we manage our top talent. So the talent pipeline is one stripe. The next piece really is a much broader training people to do their job, which helps with internal mobility because you can move people into new roles, and they can, as you say, they can take their soft skills and then develop the specific they need to do that particular job. So, and actually, interestingly, it is also an important part of how you answer the question to the regulators of how do you prove your staff fit for purpose. If you bring them in and don't give them any training, how do you know that you've got people that know their jobs? And then the third bit is for developing real industry expertise. So people who aren't interested in going up the management fast track with the talent pipeline, but still have a lot of value to bring, getting them deeper expertise. So that's starting to look into conferences and also how they become trainers. Because one of the things with people who have a lot of expertise in a particular area is they often aren't very good at imparting that to the rest of the organisation. So to make them more valuable, well, to us and to themselves, is how do they impart that knowledge? How do they become trainers of the future? So those are the three sort of strands of our people development strategy that we're in the process of implementing. But I think it's exactly to that point. Any investment in our people is very unlikely to go to not give us a return. It's can be quite difficult to measure that return. But even if you look at a team that you newly form and its productivity, and then you look at a team that's been together 2 years and its productivity, there's a huge difference. Yeah. And that difference is just that they're better trained, and they become better trained just by doing the job. But if you can better train them more quickly, then they'll be more productive. And that, even without depriving you of business by moving people internally rather than hiring externally.
Steve, do you have specific kind of retention targets around particular groups of staff, or promotion targets, or is these interventions kind of across the board?
Not particularly hard targets. I mean, that's possibly because we're in a relatively low turnover environment and have been for. I mean, there's been pockets, and a pocket was in Singapore in the last couple of years. But in general, we're in a pretty low turnover environment, so we're not too focused on that. I mean, we do track higher graded people turnover and all that sort of stuff. But I think really it's about my focus is that I believe that people bring less of themselves to work today than they did pre-crash, and the question is how do we get people re-engaged such that they are bringing more of themselves to the office and investing more. The amount of discretionary effort that people put in is much lower, I think, today than it was 5 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever.
So there's a productivity benefit to.
I mean, there's got to be, right, and I think it also helps with a good training program helps with your delivery of strategy. If part of what they're being trained is being trained in the strategy, they're more likely to be aligned to the direction that you're trying to go in as an organisation. And everybody in operations makes decisions every day. If you look at me and my management team, we are a tiny fraction of the decisions that get made in operations every day. And how we create the framework in which people make the right decisions or aligned decisions when they get the choice between managing something for a client or managing something for the bank or managing something for themselves or whatever, getting them more aligned to making the right decisions, I think is again hugely powerful.
Just wanted to ask, and sorry, what's your name?
Steve.
Tony. Just when you're talking about engagement since post-crash, do you think that's a conscious decision by employees, I give less of myself at work, or do you think it's also driven by organisational policies, structures, things like that, where a lot of organisations have tightened their belts in, so the environment is potentially driving that reaction in employees?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both. I don't think it's just a pay and rations problem. So I don't think that's the case at all. Although it's often what people attach to, because it's the whoever doesn't want to get paid a bit more. But I don't think that is the core of the problem. I joined an industry that was leading in nearly everything, right? It had the best technology, the biggest tech investment budgets, had opportunity very early on. It was global, you could travel, all of these great things that meant it was, a wow, exciting place. I finally got into to an investment bank and this, where's my career going to take me? We run Office 2003 at RBS. We're not, on the leading edge of technology. We block all of this social media. So when you look at the environment today, and where do I want to work as a top end person coming out of school, and then that obviously drives through the workforce over the following 5-10 years. It's not obvious that it's banking anymore, and I think that sort of disillusionment with what I came to do versus what the reality of the environment is, which is much tighter, much more controlled, much more regulated, all of these negatives. I think we've got an immediate problem with our current workforce, and then we've got a longer term problem with who we're going to attract in the future. Why would you work for us rather than work for Google or Yahoo or Microsoft or any of these companies that are this sort of self-flagellation that we're continuing to do in our industry, and we're not allowed to have Christmas parties or whatever. But these are things that create social cohesion amongst the teams. And, I'm sure Google do a Christmas party, right? And invest in their staff and do things that are not, they're not excessive. But we've stopped all of that stuff, right? We've cut all of that stuff away, and so it's unclear to me what. The phrase that we're using internally is the "what's in it for me" equation.
Yes.
What is it? What's in it for me personally, but also what's in it for the team as a whole. And when you start asking that question, you ask yourself some quite uncomfortable things. But I think going through the process, and we're still going through that process really. You start to you get to a point of having greater confidence actually, because you start to realise the things that really are important to you, and whether those are our family. It's the whole gamut of family, personal interests, career, opportunities, all of that sort of stuff. You start to get a better handle on what really matters to you, and then you start making better decisions for yourself as well.
I think. Does anyone have a talent development program at the moment, a high potential or a talent development program already?
We're at the beginnings of it, so we're starting to two things that we're rolling out for the first time in Asia this year is doing a talent survey from the Hay Group, which is actually, we talk a lot about the discretionary effort piece when we're delivering it to the managers, and it's interesting when you're delivering to the managers and you're talking about the discretionary effort piece. These are people who've been in the business for 5 to 10 years in their own management roles, and you talk to them about discretionary efforts and people needing to feel really engaged, and you almost need to explain that concept to them, because for them they're like, well, I've been here for 8 years. Of course, I'm married to my job. Why is it not the same for these guys who've been only working for a couple of years? So that has been really key for us at the beginnings of developing management talent, for them to understand what is motivating people now and what's going to make them be more productive and engaged in their work, and really having them engaged with where's the business going, and having them understand and be able to link what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, even the people in the technical support. How does that relate to the bigger picture of where the business is planning to go in the next 5 years? And then we're doing the talent mapping process. So we're doing the 9-box exercise, which again has been very interesting, because you get a group of managers together who are sitting there going, so they're really conflicting. And we're bringing managers together from Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Singapore, and they've all got different impressions of the same person. Because one of them says, but this person, they've got great leadership potential, and the other one goes, what? They've never once put their hand up to be involved in anything that is remotely regional rather than just local. So this is where the beginnings of doing that, and I think that's going to then develop into something which is going to be more robust, which will roll out as a region. But even these initial processes, which we run through in these conversations, you can see the team leaders and the managers identifying for themselves what they need to develop as managers. and what skill set we need to help them with develop of, and then also how they develop their individuals and how they engage more. And the role that team leaders play in that piece is so important, and getting and the climate survey is so key for getting you to understand, you know, I think it's 50 to 70% of the climate that you create is that someone experiences is directly
Direct
as a result
manager.
of their direct manager.
Yeah.
And direct managers will say, but I can't be flexible because my manager doesn't let me be flexible. So it's always then blamed sort of on the top down.
And linked to that, approximately 70% of people leaving organisations leave because of their direct manager.
Yeah. So I think
Probably the two sides of the coin.
just to answer what Steve said and what you're saying as well, if you look at in Singapore, over 60% of the people I have actually live at home with their parents. So that's a different dynamics altogether in terms of how you manage that workforce. So there's a number of things that we have to practically do on the ground to encourage that engagement, because typically most of the guys will be leaving not because they want to go to another organization, they probably want to further their careers in masters and the rest because they're dynamic. So we spend time. So the first thing we've looked at, although we have those curriculum, is how do you ensure that team leaders are engaged and are managing the workforce? Because to be honest, if you get down to the ground, those are the team leaders who are managing 8 to 10 people, not us. At a senior level, we probably typically manage 6, 7 people. That's all we touch. And then, so we've come up with a concept called iLead, which is rather than focusing on the regulators and beating managers to do things, and now the job of a team leader today is probably added 30% more work to the team leader than what it was 3 or 4 years ago. We focus on saying, okay, how do you make sure that the team leader sees that the role of the team leader is an exclusive club rather than it is something that is a hard work effort. So we come up with something called iLead, which is not from me, but just called the team leader. It says, how can you make your job fun? So they come up with something called iLead, which is a network event, networking for all managers, which I am part of. So when I go to the iLead, I am not the boss. I am just another manager who's also learning how to manage people. And they drive it. And they work through that, and then they do networking events. They then educate people around different things around how to manage conflicts and so forth. The interesting thing is that it's being managed by them rather than managed by HR.
That's very clever.
So that means that they all want to be part of that concept to drive that. Last week they had a seminar around reward. What are the rewards within the organization? How can you use that? So it's all training each other. They then have a channel called an ID channel where they communicate amongst themselves. So across the region, we're now creating almost like an exclusive club. That if you're a manager, you now belong to this exclusive club. And you can start seeing the benefits of how team leaders are seen managing their troops. The other part that we spend a lot of time on is how do we bring the families into the work environment, because the typical, if 60% are staying at home, that means that 60% are being influenced by their parents. In terms of the work environment. So we've started engaging the families a lot more into their work environment. So sometimes I do a family day where your parents come to work to see what your working environment is and so forth. And that kind of encourages people, because those are the people who are going to influence your life in terms of whether you stay RBS or not. Not necessarily, because they are driving the careers more than the individuals. So those are some of the practical things that we have to do, especially if you're looking at retention and keeping some of the talent in the organization.
So if we go back to the iLead, so is it now becoming where it's becoming self-managed? So they just
it's self-managed. I don't do anything. I just
so they take the lead.
Absolutely. That's the engagement part. They become self-managed and they drive. I think Steve, you're going to probably see one tomorrow in terms of. And they drive it. I don't do anything. I'm part of it. I'm also learning from them. So when I go there, I'm just a participant and learning from how to manage the next generation of talent, of which some of these are, frankly, people that I have never managed in my life, so I have to learn as well.
So from an HR perspective, how do you measure the success of that? How do you, if you're not, so you're present as a participant as opposed to HR kind of monitoring and seeing how it's going. What's the kind of the measurements of success?
So clearly it will come through, we do a yearly your feedback survey, so it will come through those kind of results. And to be honest, given where things are going right now, if I maintain the same score as last year, I'm doing very well in terms of your feedback. So
setting expectations.
So we measure through things like your feedback. We also measure through our things like our mobility. type thing. So we do a lot of mobilities where we move the talent around. So we actually do track on a monthly basis, and we sit down and actually go, how many people have we moved around? Because a lot of
Move around the office or move around locations?
Locations, office, everything else. Because a lot of that is the mindset of the managers allowing their people to move around. So we track that, and then you can start seeing that as the education is happening, we're actually moving more people around, and people are willing to bring and discuss their own people on the table rather than actually forcing them to do things. So we track those kind of things, and obviously we track our retention rates and so forth. So we look at those kind of specific activities as well. The iLead also started looking at things like diversity, so we started working through diversity from a gender point of view, and also how do you get the locals into senior positions. And interestingly, the next debate they're going to have, which I just sent them an email, have a look at it and saying, should we set up quotas? So they're going to debate and come back. Yeah. And then the other one that we're talking about is flexible working. How do we do flexible working? So they'll just discuss it and come back and say, this is what we think is the best thing for us. So it's now set up a team where they are, I believe, they're more engaged to drive what they want to see rather than us telling them what they should see.
Hi, I'm Grace from Golden Agri. I just wanted to check, how did you get the club going? Because if, for example, the sentiments are saying that what's in it for me, why would I do it? I could just envision some people would say, I'm doing your job.
So I got a club by first of all empathizing. So I have something called a coffee session where I go at teams of, in Singapore, big town halls don't necessarily work. So I always go exclusive teams of 10 to 20 people. We sit around the table and we discuss informally. And I got to go in by empathizing with them to say, look, I'm also struggling as a manager to work through all these 20-30% additional things that we have to do as a manager. How can we all work together? Because we're all aspiring to learn the same thing. And from a beneficial point of view, whether you're here or in another organization, being a good leader and a good manager can only benefit your career going forward. So I said, look, we're all struggling with this. How can we sort this out? And they all came back and said, look, let us take this away. We'll come back. Of course, you always find there one or two ambassadors who are willing to drive the discussion. And if you identify those ones, I call them, they can spread the word for you. And these are the ones who came forward. And obviously, they always become your talented people. And these are the ones who then said, look, 2 or 3 people came to my office and said, look, we've thought about this. This is what we think. And it's a great idea. And where I come in is a sponsorship, making sure that they feel like you really support them and you can drive it. So I said to them, you've got 30 hours of my time. I actually said 20 hours of my time every 2 months. Whatever you need, just block it out, and then I'll give you all the commitment for that. So they feel like the commitment is there to be able to get things going, and then they got it going. Now it's to be rolled out. That's just one concept, but it's more thinking of practically, especially in the Singapore environment, how you deal with that kind of population that we have.
Have you been able to measure yet whether you're getting traction in your engagement or in your retention?
Yeah, what we measure today, absolutely. But part of that is a factor of probably where the industry is. But the other part, which I'm more interested in, is are they managing people properly? Because I can see that. So what we do is we do performance assurance around objective setting and mid-year reviews and so forth. So actually, every time people do the performance reviews and so forth, we actually get a team of I get about 6 or 7 randomly from the team, and we actually look at it, and you can see consistently that the quality is getting better. Through that, and I can only think that it's only because they actually sit down and discuss how to manage difficult decisions and all that kind of stuff. And I can see the quality. It's not there yet, but I can see the quality getting better in terms of how they're managing people. But there's still some way to go in terms of, because what we have is technical people who are managing people, and without addressing that, that's it.
I think we really hit a nail about technical people. One of the challenges that we have is really people tend to just promote people who are technical for years, never really had managerial experience. So that's one of the challenges that we have. So we kind of put in a bit more, parameters around promoting these people. So we want to make sure we expose them to different things before we do that. That's one form of retention for us as a strategy. The 9 box is also the other one that we do. And the other thing that I like about what you said is actually through your activities, you can actually survey some of the key talents that you really wanted to groom them any further, right? So one thing we did was really empowering them with mentoring program and said, you guys are ready, pretty much there. And every manager should be a mentor to somebody else. That is one way that we actually figure out was relatively good for us, because we realized that, in Visa, a lot of people are very technical, where they came from, a lot of good experiences from very good organizations. But when they come to Visa, it was highly matrix organization, growing in a very different space, kind of like technology and financial. So that is one thing that we struggle. Actually, we have a lot of people leaving us within the first year. So we really need to make sure that we are actually training our managers just to make sure that they actually, be the buddies and mentors to these people. Then we have sustainability as well.
One of the great things that you're doing and that the literature will say on mentoring and coaching programs is that the ones that work best are the ones where there's the reverse relationship going. So the mentor and the mentee, or the coach and the coachee, have an exchange and see that they can learn from each other, and that those relationships become stronger and last longer, and people get more value from them than the top to the bottom. The 9x3 or the 3x3, the 9-box grid. I'd be really interested to know, because I've had my own experience with this and read a lot about it as well. Is typically the easier part to measure is performance, because we're all pretty good at measuring performance because you can get quantitative data around performance, but opinions tend to shape the potential side of it, and the opinions are very divergent. And so I'm just wondering whether anybody is using a 9x3 where you're measuring potential. You measure potential. How do you measure it?
It's not a science. So first of all, you need to acknowledge that it's just not a science to it. It's because it's so matrix organization, we determine that there are a few factors that we use that we'll definitely do, and those things are important to us. So for instance, executive demeanor is one thing that is important for us. So we actually determine like 4 or 5 factors. And what we'll do is we'll work with the function heads as well as the country managers, because most of them cover Asia Pacific, Central Europe, Middle East, and get to a sort of alignment. When you actually flesh out the 9 box with potential and performance, they will be always up for debates. So which is great. We want them to debate about it. So at the end of the day, whoever who is on the 8, 9, 6 are the ones that we all confirm are great, right? That's exactly the dialogue that we wanted to. And then what we do is we put them into programs like what you guys are doing, but not in that scale, to basically flesh them out in some of the regional projects that we do. At the end of the day, we will be very sure who is the one who can raise above the bar. And those are the people that will spend a lot more effort doing, focusing on that. The rest, what we do is we develop them further, make them as managers or, ambassadors of something else, and see whether they are mobile, and so they can move around the region as well. So that's how we use those programs to actually survey some of the topics.
I think one of the challenges that we're having, I'm from Baker McKenzie, a law firm, and we have sort of career conversations, and a lot of the younger generation, they just don't want to progress. They don't want to become partner. They pretty much just say, why would I? I don't want to put the hours in. I earn good money doing what I'm doing.
It's interesting you said. I was reading an article in Time magazine recently. I think it's the latest Time magazine, and it's talking about the younger generation now. None of them want to be CEOs. They want to be the PAs of the CEOs. So that the aspiration is not to get to the senior leadership anymore, which is interesting what you're talking about. It's things that recent Time magazine, which is out.
It's just shifting my whole sort of perception. Coming from the UK, we had high performers and kind of all these different talent management strategies, and here you sort of have at each level progression and making sure that you do the management training before you promote them. And most of them just aren't interested. It's really, really tough.
It's interesting. Again, that sort of the perception that being a manager is not an attractive. You were saying, I have people who are standing down from a role as a team leader, and then you talk to people in their team, the person who's their backup, the other person you think they've been identified, they're in the top 3, the big 3 boxes, and you say, so would you maybe consider a team leader role in the future? And they just say, well, no, I sit next to Steph and I see
why would I want that?
what she goes through every day. And frankly, being the backup is the perfect position because I've got
I'm not exposed.
I can go, right, Steph, I'll see you tomorrow, and hope everything gets sorted. So there is that. How can we make a team leader position, a manager position, seem attractive and that it's something that people aspire to, because certainly there's an issue with at Bloomberg that in certain departments, and it does come, that aspiration and the lack of that comes directly from the senior managers, and you can see it. You follow the track up and you go, okay, that makes sense, and there's certain patterns, and so then you say, but how is it? And I'm not new to Bloomberg, but I'm new to Asia. I'm sitting there going, how has this person been in this role for this long in a management position? And everyone's talking about the problems, but we're still doing nothing about it. And that goes back to the fact that they are great at their job. They're great at their day-to-day job as on the technical side. They're a brilliant editor. They're a brilliant customer support person. And that's why that's ultimately, they're still rated very highly. They're one of the top performers, but they are bad people managers. And
I don't know. I think the profile of the people manager, and I recruit predominantly in banking, and I've been doing that now for too long. It's changed significantly, especially in Singapore, because I think culturally in Singapore, if you're going to be a people manager in any industry, you've got to accept the fact that you'll make decisions sometimes and they'll be wrong. Now, in Singapore, there's a real stigma associated with that, because you're brought up and you're trained that you're told that if you're not getting 90% in your exams, you're failing. And I've got staff who have got children and they take time off because the child's got an exam and the kid's 8. And I'm like, oh my God, that pressure of being, that's culturally instilled. So if we're getting those people out of university and after a couple of years at work and then they're promoted and become an AVP and then they start getting things wrong, they're thinking that they're failing. So then it's up to the manager to be, and it comes into that mentoring. It's okay to be wrong. And I have to constantly say that to some of my people managers. It's fine to be wrong sometimes. You will be wrong sometimes. And if you're not, you're probably not doing your job. You're probably not pushing the boundaries enough. Because, Nicola, the point you just made, it's about, there's a lot of pressure being a manager and you feel that pressure about being right all the time. And that's, you've got to accept the fact that that's, you're not going to be right. Sometimes people will be upset and that's part of the job.
And it's just fun.
Yeah, but that's not something you can learn overnight. It takes time for that to become comfortable with that. And that can take years. Some people are cool with it. That's why I think the definition of a good manager, yes, you've got to have some technical skills and experience, but secondly, you've got to be very resilient and you've got to be cool with being wrong and all these other things that culturally here we're told, no, that's not right. That's you're not. If you're doing that, that's wrong. You're failing.
And I think it's also critical to be a little, have a little empathy. I have been lucky with a couple of my own managers. Just a simple touch, and having a connect call with your employees once, with your direct employees maybe once in a month, or like when I joined, I had a connect call every week to ensure I'm settling in, that I'm comfortable, I understand the environment, So and that's something now we go back and educate our managers, saying, when people join, please take out that time and spend that 1 hour a week with them. That's critical for them to feel valued. And it's very critical to then help them retain, that's critical.
It's definitely the softer skills.
An example, like for myself, before I was promoted as a people manager, my manager asked myself, do you have children, you see them grow, you invest time in them, you nurture them, do you enjoy that? I said, yes, I enjoy that. Then she said, yes, then you enjoy the role of a people manager. Because you really need to, this is addition to whatever else you've been doing, your normal day job. So you really need to, nurture your people. And another thing which I'd like to share with IBM, what we do is when we promote people to people managers, they have to go through a process. So they have to fill up a questionnaire, what they think about themselves, how good they are, and there are certain questions about how good they will be able to manage teams. And then they have an interview process based on the behavioral-based structured interview techniques. And then they also they have to fill up this HDMI questionnaire, which will see how good they will be able to perform in future. So based on these 3 scores of their personal assessment, the interview, and the HDMI score, then we will decide if these people are ready to be people managers. So there's nothing to do with the technical skills. They might be super good, but what their potential are to be people managers. So that's what we do to identify people managers.
And definitely, the more elements that you can add into the assessment process of potential, the less it's about a debate, and the more data you actually have to then help the person succeed. One of the really tricky parts, Craig, about managing people who are high performers, and especially those who are high potential high performers, is that their profile is that they're used to succeeding. So as they've come through school and into the workforce, and they have a success profile. They have a track record of succeeding, winning, much more often than failing. And in fact, Andrew and I were just having this discussion earlier this morning that one of the characteristics of high potentials is that they tend to get to quite senior levels in their career, like mid to senior management, before they have their first serious failure. And that what happens then is a crisis. So where ordinary people have crisis points all along the way, throughout school, throughout their life, because they fail, they get things wrong, and they learn to cope with failure. High potentials and tend to get to middle to senior management, have a failure, and then it either has one of two outcomes. They completely collapse under their own failure, or they get set back a really long way. They have to dig really deep and figure out, in fact, who they truly are, what is core to who they are, because they have to come up with a new answer, and then they actually go from strength to strength. But having assessed profiles and knowing what is likely to happen, where the person's fundamental strengths lie, and also where they're just not as strong, you can help to predict where those crises may occur and cushion them for them along the way, and help them when they hit them. So it's one of the really important pieces, and I've been involved in organisations, including Hudson, that have done the 9x3 with and without assessments, and it is, as long as you follow through, having done the assessments, there's no point in doing them because it's a big investment. There's no point in doing them if you don't then use them. But if you really use them to help the person in their career, they can be extremely helpful in identifying potential, but also coaching them through to be more likely to be successful, and coaching them through crises as well, and putting the mechanisms around them that when they hit a crisis, they've got a coach, they've got a mentor, they've got tools to kind of help them through it. So that would be one of the key things that I would say. Obviously, IBM's doing it.
Sometimes we think that we're doing too much.
Well, and it seems that way, right? It does seem that way. And I've been there and I've seen it. It seems like it's a lot of time, it's a lot of cost to do that kind of program. But if you save one person, that's probably worth every bit of the cost of that investment.
It's also how you're preparing people to be. Because once you've identified that there are potential, and that they demonstrate the potential skill set. And one thing, when it happened to me, I was literally asked one day, how do you feel about leading a team back when I was in London? I was like, well, yeah, no, potentially really up for it, would love to talk more about it. And literally a week later, they said, right, so going on for a discussion last week, we decided we'd like to put you into a team leader role. I then spent the next 6 months in the team leader role, learning how to manage people in the role.
Yeah, that's same.
And it happens so much, happens all over the place, and you think, well, we need to spend some time with these guys before they move into the role, and explain to them, what is expected of you. How are we going to manage your performance as a team leader?
The problem we have is we have a real lack of role models within the senior leadership team. So we're sort of trying to start right the way from our trainees with coaching and mentoring as soon as they've left university. Right, we'll get you on board now. And then you've got partners saying, yeah, but I need to scold him. It's like, I've not heard that word since Victorian era. They're talking about scolding people. It's really difficult to sort of get the two-way communication for the lead. The leaders just don't understand this, where the new trainees are coming from. Why don't they want to be partner? Because they're burning out after exactly 3 or 4 years. They're the top performers at NUS. They've got, they've been to every best school. They've had every opportunity. They come into a law firm 2 or 3 years. They're in cotton wool. By year 3 or 4, they've got responsibility, a little bit of autonomy, and they either leave or they burn and go in house, whatever. But the partners can't then see the support that they need to be giving to move them into that next level. And we just have that dropout at that rate.
Another thing that at IBM we do is like, as soon as a person is promoted to a people manager, they are supposed to go through a mandatory 3-day training, which is called a basic blue. Blue means IBMers, so basic blue training, and this training it definitely goes through a lot of programs, a lot of tools and tricks. And another thing which personally I thought is quite useful is that there's a 4-brain model, 4 side, left, upper left, and lower left, and talk about this.
Conscious.
Yeah. So so I think that's a good it's introduction to the program, and it starts with this concept. People can think about, and they can be very good analytically. Some people are very HR oriented, soft skills good. So I think we have this program which actually helps the new managers take on the role head on.
But how do you get the buy-in from it? I mean, the thing is, the buy-in from the leadership team. We tried to run a 1-day program, and they said, no, do it on a Saturday. We're at that stage where if we want to run something for a day, they don't want them out of the office for that side.
Sometimes I think being a globally integrated organization, they are definitely help. There are strong points or there are positives to it, because these are global initiatives, and there's no way a manager can say no.
IBM is very strong. I started my graduate program at IBM. And I thought it was a luxury position to be in. There was a people manager and there was a technical manager, and your people manager only manages people.
Yes.
And it's a functional manager. Yeah. So it was almost like watching an England football manager negotiating with a club manager. The people managers, all they focus about is your career, and the technical guy wants you to earn money for the organization. So there's always had to broker with a technical guy. But they have an agreement that, you will do 8 days of training in a year or whatever it is. And that agreement is there. They block it out. And so it wasn't like a debate. It was like, this is what you're going to do. And it's planned out. And it was actually quite fantastic.
For this year, our CEO has announced that each and every IBMer needs to invest 40 hours in training. So this is part of your PVC, your performance targets.
Yeah.
And your people manager really supports that, and then you identify with your people manager, with inputs from your functional manager, which could be some of the key areas that you want to develop from both the technical aspect as well as from a soft skill perspective. So that match really works well.
I think part of the problem is as a senior manager setting the tone, and this stuff I guess comes from the very top of the organisation. You have to be quite altruistic. Because chances are, if you're a CEO, maybe you've got 5 years, very little value will come out of trying to change an organisation to operate in that way during the period that you're in power, if you like. So you're doing work for your successor and your successor's successor. So it comes back to doing the right thing rather than being self-centred about trying to get the most value out. And I think people can probably see the sort of asset stripper type of senior leader versus the investing in the future type of senior leader. The problem is there's not a great deal. I mean, it becomes part of the culture of the organisation, so it would be very hard to strip that out of an IBM now, I would imagine.
It's becoming
and so, it's less important. But how you actually introduce it, I think you need somebody to have a view that goes well beyond their likely tenure in the organisation. I think it's about whether you buy that the culture of your organisation is important or not, because I think a lot of this stuff grows out of the culture.
And a lot of that is now appealing to the whole millennial thing. That's a massive big thing, and I think culturally we need to start making the change within our firm. It's just interesting you said about the taking away all the social networking. Are people just not on their iPhones anyway? Is it?
Yeah, exactly. I know it's kind of ridiculous. There is some logic behind it, but we have to. But rather than blocking, we have to find a way of dealing with. Because what it's taking away huge amounts of opportunity for us to network, and you end up getting these really awful corporate versions of which are horrible to use, and you can't work out how they work. They're not intuitive like a Facebook or whatever it would be. But I think we're going to have to find ways of bringing that stuff in. Most of the issue is around confidentiality and security.
Yeah, we did
It's such
a
a ridiculous thing anyway, because this world that we live in now is no longer confidential.
It's not confidential.
Whether you follow social media or not, it's
But it's quite interesting. Even in the Singapore office,
that they express.
in the Singapore office, when I get the guys together, I say, how do you communicate? And they all have a WhatsApp group.
yes.
So on that floor, there's a WhatsApp group. Anything that goes on that floor gets through WhatsApp. And that's how they communicate, not internally.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this is what the guys are doing. So actually, and so I said, how do you maintain confidentiality? Well, we don't mention our years in there. We just talk.
Yeah.
We just communicate. So you're already doing it, but as an organization, we have designed it because these guys are communicating externally anyway.
Yeah,
it's
we did
interesting.
so we did a recent Hudson report on the CO on the mobile devices and bringing them to organisations, because you've got young people coming in and their technology is more high tech than the organisation they're joining.
Absolutely.
Right. So
And their knowledge of it as well.
So CIOs are really struggling with that balance between how do they manage their confidentiality, how do they keep them engaged, because they walk in, you talked about Microsoft 2003, and at home they've got the latest stuff, they've got an Apple computer and they're doing all sorts of things. So
My nephew works with Telly and does that. Where's the next channel?
See, I love that. So it's a real challenge, and when you meet with some of these CIOs, and we spent a lot of time last year meeting with them and talking through, they're investing all their money on that security. How do they actually manage that? But you're right, it's really a balancing out. How do they manage? So it's more a case of how do you manage? Are they using RBS or is it just communicating? So it's a real challenge, and I know we've talked to a number of those organisations even in this room about that. So. But the CIOs, they're just got to come up to speed with it. It's interesting, more organisations are adapting to it more and more, because the more they fight it, the more they lose their people. And that's the reality, because they are going to lose it. Because
I just joined the networks.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like here, when Malaysia votes was happening, all the Malaysia office were on WhatsApp. So I just joined their network, and then they just communicate, and you be part of it.
It's our IT guy here, because we have an IT person here, and on day one, anyone new person brings their latest and goes, can I have my emails on it? You know, so because I want to be up to date, keep what's going on in the world as well. You talk about your young generation, I talk about my 12-year-old who's telling me in the car how good it is to work at Google. I think when you mentioned it, I'm going, so they're already marketing to that next generation. He's already telling me, you know, you can actually take your dogs to work and they've got a pet, and they're listing it all, and that's a 12-year-old's view of what a workplace should be. So God help us when they do graduate.
It's interesting that sorry.
At IBM, we also have kids at day work, so you can actually bring your kids in and they get to see what is mommy's day like or daddy's day like, and why is it that when you're calling like, I'm in a meeting, put the phone down, not right now. So they understand, you bring them into the environment, they can sit with you at your desk and they can continue to play, just for them to know what it is like. So that helps them also kind of understand, and it's interesting for them.
So a number of you have worked in different countries and different locations, or got regional roles. So we bring it back to the Singapore market. So how do we develop the local talent for these senior roles? Because that seems to be one of the biggest issues as well, because we can't just keep bringing in foreign workers. We just can't, because there's lots of reasons for that. But how do we grab this bunch of people we're talking about, and how do we identify if they're local and then bring them through? When I say local, I'm talking about Singapore citizens. So how do we bring them through into these roles? Because they are dropping out for a number of reasons. I think you touched on it, living at home or whatever reason, because we'll get to the same situation in a few years' time where we've got the same issue and nothing's moved along. So really keen to, how do we move them along? How do we...
It's interesting, just to the, one challenge, because we're talking a lot about this, the local talent. We've gone through a whole process of defining, first of all, what local talent actually is. Because should somebody who has been a permanent resident in Singapore for 15 years be considered as local, even though originally they are from Australia or the UK or the US? And then also is local, even if Singapore is local about considered as Asian, or either Asian or Western, local versus expat, or is it very difficult? So to get to how do we develop local talent, the first thing we're trying to do is, okay, what is local? And we've come up with, so far I think, about 10 different definitions of what local is.
We get a different one every day.
Don't
define
it. We've defined different things, but we just say, look, we can spend 2 weeks, 1 year defining it. Let's draw a line somewhere and say, actually, this is what let's start, because at the end of the day, we want to have a bigger catchment anyway, but we just have to prioritize. So So I just threw the guys and said, you come back and you tell me. I didn't say, I just, you come back and tell me what you believe is a local definition. And they said, you know, we don't believe it's a local definition. Let's start with, all they came out, let's start with people who are Singapore citizens. Let's start with that, whatever the definition is. Let's work through that. And then
If you work with,
that's
like,
what
you
they've come
know,
up with.
IBM, we work with EDB. Like, you know, there are some initiatives and we work with EDB and we get some funding from EDB to hire, like, you know, we're working on this program to hire 20 people and we train them on certain skills. So for them, the definition, so they say you have to hire everybody to be local, and the definition of local is Singaporean and Singapore citizen PR.
Yeah, that's what we kind of define and say, let's go with that. Yeah. But it's interesting, when you do statistics, in our organization around Singapore citizens, there's not that many. If you add on PRs, it adds a bit more and the rest, but actually citizens itself, because even a lot of the Malaysians living here are on PR, not citizens.
So that's why the interesting thing is,
Correct.
right? Because I am a local.
Exactly,
right?
local.
And-
They call it local, that's exactly what they said, local. It's a new definition.
Exactly. But it's not, so first of all, I guess you have to think about it from the government's effort.
Yes.
Right? You can't think of it from the company's effort.
That's
think
right.
about what the government is saying.
That's
think
right.
about the white paper. Think about how many people we have, in several years later, and 55% of them are pure Singaporeans, are called Singaporeans. So first of all, a lot of people like to also ask me, how do we attract more Singaporeans into the organization? Now, there is a limitation to it because now, last time maybe when I sit in a meeting with people, I see a lot of Singaporeans. Now I'm become a minority myself, right? You can just look around. In every meetings I go, it's a minority, and we could go into diversity some more, right? Because it's about women and locals and all. So I think that's a proposition that first of all, if you understand what the government is doing, then we need to get away from it. Finding a Singaporean to really groom them, yeah, that's the best thing. But at the end of the day, even for us, really the best person gets the job. That's what it is, right? We need people to move around in that space. So I think if we're trying very hard, we should continue unless you can say that there's a job and then you find somebody with different experience and then you pick the Singaporean. A lot of times you don't have that choice. No. Not even for ourselves, we don't have that choice where we needed somebody who is actually exposed and different. We wish that we could, but at the end of the day, so sometimes a lot of managers come to ask me, should I pick this person or not? No, you pick the best person. That's really what it is, right? That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, no, I do agree they pick the best person, but there are some practical things being in. I can relate to it because I grew up in Ghana, studying in the UK, and working in the UK. There are some practical things that one always has to look at. The education system is very, very different, and which means that you've got to think long term, not short term. Which means organizations actually have to start investing with the universities as well, because the way the talent are coming through, sometimes when they come through the organization, there is a perception that they've studied significantly, but not necessarily having a broader aspiration. So you can't just fix it overnight. You have to work with some of the universities to expand some of the horizon as well. And I can say the same thing for myself also, having gone into a different environment. And so then you have to work out that still the best person has to get a job. But who defines what's the best person? It's just a human being defining what they believe is the best person. In the end, a lot of this is subjective, to be fair. So you have to then be pragmatic to say, in the Singapore environment, you have to spend some time, especially around the locals, to nurture, because the person coming from, say, the UK, for example, has had a different experience. So in the end, it'll probably be the best person, not because of that, but not necessarily the best person, but has a different experience. So you have to recognize that and say, okay, how do you nurture the locals to have a different experience as well? And hopefully you can bring those things through. And this is where we spend a lot of our time trying to work out that in the end we'll get the best person, but actually we have to provide a bit of special attention to a number of different segments to be able to nurture them through that. And that's a lot of time we spend our time. Some people may feel it's being special to people. It's not. It's just recognizing that there are different backgrounds and different skill sets, and you have to identify those and then nurture those.
Well, we have some really interesting recruitment conversations, and I had one just the other week with someone who wanted to recruit somebody because they were a yes person, and they would basically do whatever this person said. They weren't going to be a challenge, and having a conversation. My expectations of somebody that I'm bringing into the business completely different to to what the Singaporean manager wanted from their individual. And you have these conversations about, what makes the person good, whether it's technically or, with our graduate recruitment, they're looking at the grades. Oh my God, they've got all A's. But they can't hold a conversation. How are they going to speak to a client? How are they going to network? Let's get the person that's got maybe the odd B. Dare they do get a B, instead of an A all the time. And it's like having these conversations with some of the managers is quite frustrating.
And it's basic things in basic education as well, because invariably, to your point, a lot of some of the managers will all be experts, and they will say to you they're very qualified in managing a local talent. In some cases, they're not. So even if you sit in a room of 10 people, you see a number of people being quiet. I mean, how do you get them into the conversation? Because invariably, the person sometimes who's the loudest, you think, actually is. But the one with the real knowledge, and I find that especially in Singapore, if you don't get to some sort of informal conversations and you really bring the best out, you will leave some of these guys behind. So it's about educating managers as well to spot the differences and all that, and that's where it needs a bit of work around that, because you cannot leave it by default that it will happen. Because
why is there a desire for more local? Where does that come from? I don't know what the government paper says, Jen.
So basically, the white paper says that we need to grow grow the population for economic purposes and all the wonderful things. And at the end of the day, it's also not to make the locals feel left out.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the main purpose of everything else.
And
it's actually what the problem is for Singapore is it needs more immigration, not that it needs more.
There's a shrinking and ageing population of citizens,
Yeah.
and that's the number one thing that the government's highlighted. So they're looking for a real balance.
And they also want a more prosperous local
Yeah.
population, which is
Sure.
not an unreasonable aspiration.
Yeah.
And so they're starting to cut back the number of immigrants actually that can enter the workforce, and encouraging businesses to educate and lift the local population.
It's balance, isn't it?
It is a
Balance
balance.
between getting to the point where the tax rate has to hike up in order to be able to afford an elderly population for the people versus getting more people into the workforce so you keep expanding the workforce.
And some of the policies brought in. So with graduates now, you can't hire foreign graduates. So it's really about focusing on that local talent and start to bring those through. And it makes perfect sense, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big challenges, and we're sort of touching on it, is how you manage those cultural differences in global organisations.
That's more.
Because I think one of the things that I've seen in two organisations with Singaporean managers, Hong Kong, I mean everywhere really, is how they interact with wherever their head office is. Whether that's Switzerland or the UK or the US, and that to be a senior manager of whatever background, you have to be able to adapt your culture to the head office, to be able to communicate, and once you get to a certain level of seniority. It's very different if you're running a local business. If you're running a local, not a large portion of our client base for RBS is Singaporean local. There is some, and there's some important ones, and so there's a clear cultural connection between Singaporeans and Singaporean investors. But when your pool of clients is much broader, you need to have the ability to connect UK or US investors into the Singaporean market as well, or into the Asian market.
I'm quite interested in Nerida, in ANZ Bank, how Nerida's head of internal recruitment here. So I'm quite interested to know how you are addressing this particular issue from an internal recruitment perspective.
It's a really interesting one. It's a huge issue for us at the moment as well. And we had this conversation, HR and recruitment, the other day. And it was around, because we're growing, we're lucky, we're in a fortunate position where we're actually, creating a lot of roles in Singapore. But the first thing we do is go externally, we go internationally, and we find people with the skills and the experience that we have because we don't think we've got it internally. And the challenge is, at what point do we stop and say, let's look internally and give some of these people a chance, even though they don't have 100% what we're looking for?
That is important.
And that is it's really hard because we're growing. We need people to deliver here, but how can we get them from here up to here and support that as well? We don't have the answers at all, but it's something we're focusing on.
I was going to say, we've got the same problem, and I think it's your organisational drivers, the pressure on your senior leaders who normally are your expats. I've got a position that otherwise would be great for grooming a local, but I need someone in there who I know can do the job, and I'm driven by the short-term priorities of the business. So therefore, that's what I'm looking to, or how I look to fill the role, as opposed to using it as a development opportunity.
There's one guy, I won't mention names, but I was determined that I think he was ready to become an MD. It's a local. And I sat down with him and I said, I think you could be an MD, but this is the streetwise of how the organization works. So I always tell the people that some of the things which are written in the book, and there are things which are streetwise in any organization. And you have to invest time understanding the streetwise of the organization, which is how the promotion system works, how these things work. And if you don't understand that, how are you going to do that? So I spoke to the local and I said, this is what you have to do. And he says, well, that's not how I'm brought up. So then how do you manage someone to be able to spend time understanding the global teams, networking with the global teams? That person it says to me that actually most decisions in banks, in foreign banks, get done after 1 a.m. after drinks. And for locals, we want to go home by 10 o'clock. So how do I get into those kind of conversations when I want to go home by 10 o'clock? But actually the rest of the expats will be in the pub till 1 o'clock, and that's when the decisions get made. So we have to start from that basic and misalignment in terms of what I think is the practical things of how to do it versus that, and then we have to come to some happy medium of understanding the person's background and the person's culture to linking it back to the organization, and then get to a situation where that person can be promoted. And in the end, the person gets an MD. But without understanding the differences that how people are thinking, especially in this place, there's a misalignment, and we have to work through that.
It's not all that different, though, I have to say, from, and I'm old enough to be able to remember this, is with women coming up. There was a time when women were just so completely different in the management and executive environment from men that you could not belong to the men's club. You didn't want to belong to the men's club. The particular club that they were running was not one you were interested in, and they had to find a way to integrate us, and we had to find a way to work with them. And over time now, that's become less and less an issue. But what it requires is some will from both sides, I think. The commitment to making it happen, and people who have the vision to want to create legacies and so on. It does need that. Yeah.
And it starts with the selection process. So often when we have this, as you were saying, we have the initial interviews that are done by the managers here in Singapore, and then for certain roles we get the regional managers involved, who are often based in London or the US, in the interview process. And you so often hear feedback like, really good communication skills, really thought about their questions, but it's just something that just didn't sort of exude enthusiasm about the role. They weren't, there's that kind of I just wanted them to be jumping out of their seats with excitement about this fantastic opportunity at Bloomberg. And I'm just going, but that's all very well when you're constantly interviewing people in the US or in the UK, because people come in and they kind of overdo this whole I can't wait to get to work. But culturally there are real differences, and people just aren't. Some cultures just naturally don't come in being really over the top with their enthusiasm, and they almost they look too superficially at just a person and the impression that they give, rather than really listening to what they're saying and the skills that they can potentially offer. I think that's something which we work on, is how do we educate people to get better at recognising what you're genuinely looking for. You're not looking for someone who, one manager actually said to me, I just didn't see myself being able to go down to the pub and have a pint with this person. I put down the phone, I was like, I'm coming over. Okay, let's talk about this face to face. If not, this phone's being recorded.
We actually do invest.
Sorry. So that's the key point.
Yes.
Is to find that balance.
That's right.
It's tough, right? In any culture, in any country,
yes.
you look for IQ, EQ,
Yes.
right? And just to let you know, Singaporeans do not want to be just selected for the sake of being selected.
That's right.
We are taught in a certain way that deliverables are more important. And therefore, you need to use them in the right way, right? So that's one. The second one is if you have a IQ and EQ person, all the best. You can always train them up. They will always, flexibility, changing environment. And we're brought up in an environment where we want to live in harmony, right? That's what we are. We want to accept different cultures and all. People who have lived through some things, not that I have, would actually know that, okay, the government tells you, and for all the good reasons, is harmony, acceptance of other people's culture. That is fundamental for us if you look through the Singapore history. So that's where we are always very accepting to, foreigners coming to that part of our world. So I think the other thing is if you deliberately just want to get a local person, you really just need to use them well. No different from sometimes when I talk to, even for myself, I talk to my colleagues in Japan, where English is not their first language. They are slower in terms of understanding, but that doesn't mean that they're not good. You have to use them in their strengths.
Yes.
You have to use them in Japan, because that's where they're very, very good at, relationships, Korea and all. So I think it's really using people. So I think it's just the balanced person that you're always looking for.
And it goes right back to what Tracy's saying when we're coming into those senior roles. You didn't want to get the job just because you're a woman. You want to get it because you're the right person for the role. And it's the same thing for everyone. It's just making sure that we're actually assessing that. But I'm really conscious of time, and I'm quite enjoying this conversation. So it's 20 past. So what I want to do now is, first up is thank you all, because I wanted to get you out of here by 10:30. Within your packs, in there is our latest Hudson report, which we did for Q2, and we actually touched on the high potential, some really good findings in there. So if there's any additional information you'd like to know, I didn't introduce Jamie and Craig from our business who are sitting here, so I apologise for that. Got Jamie from our HR practice and Craig, our director for the HR team. And Tracy's here for the next few days, but we'll make sure you get her contact details if there's any other questions you want to find out about her learnings around the globe, what's happening, because these challenges are not just unique to Singapore. We know the Australians are having the same issues with their visas. We've got an election coming up at the end of the year, so there's a real balancing act on that as well. A lot of the initiatives in that market is about how do we actually hire locally as well. So this is not unique. The US is going through the same. We know the UK is going through the same. So it's good to share this knowledge and continue to learn from it. So I want to thank you for your time today. Appreciate it. It's always tough first thing in the morning. And thank you all. You're also being so open and candid as well. And thank you, Tracy, for coming as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you guys are all right about the local government.
Oh, it's all right.
Last night, finished something, so they wanted to
So you're earlier than I thought you were going to be.
Yeah, they came in early.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so that's why I managed to.
Yeah.
At first I thought
I'll introduce you to Tracy before you go.
Thank
Thank you so much for coming.
No worries.
Thank you for coming.
I mean, and when you.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming as well. There's a couple of things. And my job is telling you, be careful here.
Black and yellow tape.
Alright, I'll let you step over.
That always gets attention.
Some local insights.
Good. Thanks for
That was really good to meet you.
It's okay.
I'm based, my job's based in New York.
It's too close.
Yeah, so I just travel.
So I'm actually going to be down
Just because
4 weeks.
it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And he has been covering primarily corporate yeah, you're not a client, he's been working with some other clients. And I'm pretty confident it's going to be higher.
Just don't walk that way. Come this way, Grace. You might trip.
I think you're right.
I don't want you tripping over.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, that's how I view it. Well, he's only, again, he only.
That was a immigrant study. Did you feel that you?
But I was trying to look into that person who, as a minimum, has a foundation of mental health. And I feel like I have that. And he and I get along very well. He seems open to learning. And I feel like he's someone I can really he's not going to
There's one stay. No, obviously that's very, very.
And it's very, very different language.
Yes. Yeah.
Make it happen.
Thank you so much. It's good to meet you.
I do like it.